Excuse me, what did you just say? Ava Carter sat upright, her resume still in hand. The room had been all professional smiles, until now. Richard Coleman, the hiring manager, leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. You have an impressive background, but... He trailed off, eyes scanning her like she was an anomaly. Ava narrowed her gaze. But what? Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm just not sure you'd be right, fit for our company's culture. Silence stretched between them. Ava's grip on her resume tightened. Excuse me, what did you just say? Her voice was calm, but beneath it simmered a quiet fury. Richard just smirked, as if he was enjoying the moment. Richard exhaled slowly, setting his pen down. We have a particular environment here, he said smoothly, one that requires the right kind of leadership. Ava arched her brow. And I don't fit that. Why? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned back, the smirk never leaving his face. The air in the room grew heavy. Ava recognized this tactic, thinly veiled rejection, just vague enough to avoid legal trouble. She folded her hands in her lap, forcing herself to remain composed. Across the table, one of the other interviewers, a woman with blonde hair and nervous eyes, shifted in her seat. Ava caught the flicker of unease on her face, but the woman said nothing. She wouldn't. Ava had seen this before. People who knew something was wrong but stayed silent, afraid to risk their own standing. She looked back at Richard, her expression unreadable. I see. The silence between them thickened. Richard let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if Ava had just confirmed his assumptions. You know, he mused, we don't usually consider people like you for executive roles. Ava's stomach twisted. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He continued, voice light, almost amused. It's just an unwritten rule, I suppose. Not everyone is suited for leadership. The blonde woman flinched, but still, she said nothing. Ava's jaw tightened, but she refused to react the way he wanted her to. Instead, she took a slow breath, lifting her chin. Noted. Ava's fingers curled into a fist beneath the table. Every fiber of her being told her to call him out, to demand an explanation, to make a scene. But she knew men like Richard. He would twist her anger against her, make it seem like she was the problem. So she exhaled, forcing her hands to relax. Thank you for your time. She watched Richard's smirk widen, mistaking her restraint for submission. He had no idea what was coming. Ava stood, slow and deliberate. She locked eyes with Richard, letting him see the storm behind them. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence was a promise. Without another glance, she turned and walked out. Her heart pounded, but not with defeat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ava Carter, Harvard Business School graduate, top of her class. The words had a weight to them, but she knew better than to rely on titles alone. She closed the folder on her desk, her resume tucked inside. Prestigious degree or not, the world didn't hand out success to people like her. She had fought for every inch of progress, every opportunity. And now, another battle loomed. The job interview wasn't just about landing a position. It was about proving, once again, that she belonged. Despite the unspoken rules, despite the glass ceilings they pretended didn't exist. You don't wait for a door to open, Ava, her mother used to say. You build your own. Those words echoed in her mind as she adjusted the lapel of her blazer. Her mother had worked double shifts, pushing past exhaustion just to put food on the table. Sacrifice wasn't just a word in Ava's world, it was a foundation. She wasn't just carrying her own dreams into that interview. She was carrying generations of resilience, of women who refused to be overlooked. The Ivy League credentials never stopped the whispers. Are you sure you went to Harvard? You're so well-spoken. The microaggressions came dressed as compliments, the skepticism woven into casual conversations. Ava had learned to smile through it, but she never forgot. Even in previous jobs, her decisions were questioned more than her peers. Promotions came slower. Explanations demanded more often. But she didn't climb this far just to be tolerated. She wasn't asking for a seat at the table. She was claiming it. This interview was a means to an end. Others saw executive roles as the finish line. Ava saw them as stepping stones. While they worked for the company, she was building something of her own. She had been crafting a business plan, assembling a network, and watching how corporations moved. Every rejection, every insult only sharpened her strategy. She wasn't just here for a job, she was here to study the opposition. And soon they'd realize she wasn't just another applicant. She was their future competition. The email notification chimed. Interview confirmed, 10 a.m. Ava exhaled, rolling her shoulders back. They thought they were evaluating her, deciding if she was worthy of their company. They had no idea she was evaluating them too. And when they underestimated her, because they would, she'd be ready. Ava's heels struck the polished floor in sharp, steady beats, the only sound she allowed herself to focus on. She wouldn't give Richard the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Her breath was measured, but the fire in her chest refused to settle. She had endured prejudice before, subtle, insidious, but this was different. This was blatant. The rejection wasn't about credentials or capability, it was about her existence. As she neared the exit, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Leaving meant swallowing yet another injustice, but something in her gut told her this wasn't over. Then she heard it. A chuckle, low and smug. "Can you imagine?" Richard's voice carried through the hallway. She actually thought she had a shot. Ava stopped. Another voice, hesitant but complicated. "Yeah, but I mean, she did have the experience." Richard scoffed. Doesn't matter. We don't put people like that in executive roles." Her fingers curled into fists. She had suspected, felt it in the coded language, the dismissive tone. But hearing it out loud? The confirmation sent a sharp wave of anger coursing through her veins. She could turn around, confront him, call it what it was. But that wouldn't change a thing. No, she needed to be smarter. Ava forced herself to inhale slowly, pushing the rage deep into her core. Not to suppress it, but to control it. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint, the way people like Richard expected her to explode, to prove them right. Not today. This time, she wouldn't just walk away and forget. This time, she wouldn't let the system swallow her voice. As she reached for the door, her mind was already shifting, from anger to strategy. Back in her apartment, Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard. She had researched companies before, but this time it was personal. A pattern emerged, one too obvious to ignore. Few black employees, fewer promotions. A diversity page on their website filled with stock photos but no real representation. The numbers spoke volumes. Her rejection wasn't an isolated incident. It was policy wrapped in politeness. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had sat in that chair, hoping their work would be enough, only to be dismissed before they even had a chance. Ava's pulse steadied. She could let this go, move on, find another job, or she could expose them. Not just Richard, but the entire system that thrived on exclusion. She shut her laptop, a slow smirk forming. If they thought she was walking away quietly, they were dead wrong. The email notification chimed. Interview confirmed, 10 a.m. Ava exhaled, rolling her shoulders back. They thought they were evaluating her, deciding if she was worthy of their company. They had no idea she was evaluating them too. And when they underestimated her, because they would, she'd be ready. Ava's heels struck the polished floor in sharp, steady beats, the only sound she allowed herself to focus on. She wouldn't give Richard the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Her breath was measured, but the fire in her chest refused to settle. She had endured prejudice before, subtle, insidious, but this was different. This was blatant. The rejection wasn't about credentials or capability, it was about her existence. As she neared the exit, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Leaving meant swallowing yet another injustice, but something in her gut told her this wasn't over. Then she heard it. A chuckle, low and smug. "Can you imagine?" Richard's voice carried through the hallway. She actually thought she had a shot. Ava stopped. Another voice, hesitant but complicated. "Yeah, but I mean, she did have the experience." Richard scoffed. Doesn't matter. We don't put people like that in executive roles." Her fingers curled into fists. She had suspected, felt it in the coded language, the dismissive tone. But hearing it out loud? The confirmation sent a sharp wave of anger coursing through her veins. She could turn around, confront him, call it what it was. But that wouldn't change a thing. No, she needed to be smarter. Ava forced herself to inhale slowly, pushing the rage deep into her core. Not to suppress it, but to control it. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint, the way people like Richard expected her to explode, to prove them right. Not today. This time, she wouldn't just walk away and forget. This time, she wouldn't let the system swallow her voice. As she reached for the door, her mind was already shifting, from anger to strategy. Back in her apartment, Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard. She had researched companies before, but this time it was personal. A pattern emerged, one too obvious to ignore. Few black employees, fewer promotions. A diversity page on their website filled with stock photos but no real representation. The numbers spoke volumes. Her rejection wasn't an isolated incident. It was policy wrapped in politeness. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had sat in that chair, hoping their work would be enough, only to be dismissed before they even had a chance. Ava's pulse steadied. She could let this go, move on, find another job, or she could expose them. Not just Richard, but the entire system that thrived on exclusion. She shut her laptop, a slow smirk forming. If they thought she was walking away quietly, they were dead wrong. Ava pushed open the office doors, her steps steady, her heartbeat loud. This wasn't about pleading. It was about confronting. Richard barely glanced up from his desk. "Didn't expect to see you again." She kept her voice even. "I deserve an explanation." He sighed, feigning boredom. "We went with a better candidate." "Better?" Her fingers pressed against the folder in her hand, the same one filled with proof of her qualifications, recommendations, years of experience. "Or just whiter?" A slow chuckle. "Careful, Carter. Throwing that word around makes you look desperate." Desperate. The same word they used to silence people like her. She had worked too hard, fought too long to be dismissed like this. "I won't be ignored," she said, stepping closer. "Not this time." He finally met her gaze, a glint of amusement in his eyes. And then, the smirk. Richard leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "You just don't get it, do you?" Ava didn't blink. "Oh, I get it. You never intended to give me a chance." He tilted his head, pretending to consider. "Maybe, maybe not. Either way, you're wasting your breath." She clenched her jaw, willing herself to stay composed. "You do realize this won't stay quiet, right?" He laughed. "Who's going to listen? Some blogs? Twitter, please?" Ava exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every time she had swallowed her pride to keep the peace. But Richard wasn't just another arrogant boss. He was a symptom of something bigger. She opened her mouth to speak, but his smirk widened. "You're done here, Carter." Then he pressed the button on his desk. A crackling voice responded through the intercom. "Security." Ava stiffened. "You're serious?" Richard gave a slow shrug. "I warned you." Seconds later, 2 guards appeared. "Is there a problem, sir?" Richard didn't even look at them. "Escort her out." It wasn't the order that stung. It was how casually he delivered it, as if she were an inconvenience rather than a human being. One of the guards hesitated. "Ma'am, I can walk," she snapped, straightening her shoulders. Richard chuckled. Smart girl. The humiliation burned. Not just because of him, but because deep down she had hoped, naively, that fairness still existed. As she turned toward the door, she caught the uneasy glances from the employees watching, but none of them moved. A hushed murmur rippled through the room. "She's really getting escorted out?" someone whispered. A man near the copier shook his head. "That's messed up." A woman, arms crossed, frowned. "This doesn't feel right." But she didn't step forward. Ava's pulse pounded. This was the cycle. They saw, they whispered, but they never acted. She passed by colleagues who had once praised her work. Not one met her gaze. And then, click. Someone had their phone out. Her humiliation was turning into spectacle, but a small voice inside her whispered, "Let them watch." Because this wasn't the end of her story. At the doorway, she stopped. Slowly, she turned, locking eyes with Richard. "You'll regret this." Her voice was calm, but steel edged every syllable. His smirk faltered, just for a second. "Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night." Ava didn't flinch. "You think this is over?" A pause. Then Richard waved dismissively. "Get out, Carter." She walked away, the guard's hand hovering near her arm, unnecessary. Because Ava wasn't leaving in defeat. She was leaving with purpose. And the war had just begun. Ava gripped the phone tighter. "Say that again." Mr. Reynolds chuckled. "It's done, Ava. The deal went through. You're the new owner." A slow breath left her lips, but her pulse raced. She had played the long game, moved in silence, and now the very company that had humiliated her was under her control. "They have no idea, do they?" she murmured. "Not yet," Reynolds said, "but they'll know soon enough." Ava closed her eyes for a moment. The bitterness of what happened hadn't faded, but it had sharpened her focus. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about dismantling a system that had thrived on exclusion. "I hope Richard enjoys his seat while he still has it," she said coolly. Reynolds chuckled again. "Oh, I'd love to see his face when he finds out." Ava smiled. So would she. The documents lay in front of her, every signature confirming her ownership. The moment she had dreamed of was now real, but the weight of it settled deep in her chest. The same company that had treated her like an outsider now belonged to her. The same people who had whispered as security walked her out would soon realize who truly held power. Her fingers traced the edge of the contract. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. For every door that had been slammed in her face, for every promotion that had mysteriously gone to someone less qualified, for every time she had swallowed her anger and kept walking. She wasn't walking away this time. She was walking back in. A month later, Ava stepped through the familiar glass doors, her heels clicking against the polished floor. But today was different. The receptionist glanced up, offering the same indifferent look, until recognition flickered in her eyes. Her posture straightened. "Ms. Carter?" Ava smiled. "Good morning." Whispers ignited like sparks as she moved through the office. Every turn of a head, every hushed exchange, fed the growing awareness that something had changed. And then she saw him. Richard stood by the conference room laughing with a colleague, oblivious. Ava didn't slow her pace. She didn't need to, because today Richard would finally understand the meaning of consequence. The murmurs spread like wildfire. "Wait, is that? No way, she's the new owner." Richard turned, his laughter fading as his gaze landed on Ava. His smirk twitched, uncertainty creeping into his expression. She met his stare head-on, not breaking stride, not hesitating. The office, once a place of silent exclusion, now belonged to her. Richard's fingers curled into his palms. "You?" "Good morning, Richard," she interrupted smoothly. He swallowed hard. You're back." Ava's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Oh, I never really left." And with that, she walked past him, toward the office that was now hers. Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "All right, let's get this started," he said, scanning the room. His confidence was unshaken, until the doors swung open. Ava stepped inside, her presence commanding the room. Behind her, the top executives filed in, their expressions unreadable. Richard's smirk faltered. "What the hell is this?" The CEO, an older man with an air of finality, cleared his throat. "Richard, meet your new boss." Silence. Richard's eyes darted between faces, searching for some sort of denial, an escape route, but there was none. Ava took a measured step forward, tilting her head slightly. "Didn't take the hint?" she asked, echoing his own words from weeks ago. "You're not wanted here." The room remained still, save for the sound of Richard's shallow breathing. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. Richard's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "This is a joke," he muttered, forcing a laugh. But no one laughed with him. His skin paled. Beads of sweat formed at his temple. "You can't. This isn't happening." Ava watched as his bravado crumbled, the weight of reality pressing down on him. His breath turned ragged, his hands trembled. And then, as if his body couldn't process the sheer magnitude of his downfall, his knees buckled. Gasps filled the boardroom as Richard collapsed. Ava remained still. No pity, no satisfaction. Just the quiet confirmation that justice had finally arrived. Ava didn't waste a moment. She turned to the executives. "Effective immediately. Richard is relieved of his duties. His replacement will be announced soon." No objections, no resistance, just nods of silent approval. She faced the employees. "This company has thrived on exclusion for too long. That ends today. Hiring and promotions will be based on merit, not favoritism, not bias. Everyone deserves a fair chance." For the first time in company history, the room didn't feel stifling. The weight of inequality, of whispered injustices had lifted. Then applause. A slow ripple at first, then a wave of relieved, hopeful hands coming together. Ava exhaled, steadying herself. This was just the beginning. Ava's journey proves that resilience isn't just about survival. It's about rewriting the rules. Never underestimate the power of perseverance. When they tried to silence her, she spoke louder. When they shut the door, she built a new one. Ava didn't just demand a seat at the table, she bought the whole building. Discrimination isn't just a story, it's a reality for many. What about you? Have you ever faced injustice? How did you respond? Share your experience in the comments and let's spark a conversation. The fight for equality doesn't end here. Like, share, and subscribe to keep these powerful stories alive. Together, we can make a difference. One story, one voice at a time.